debate, and the honourable member for Kenora.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to join debate today on Bill C-14, which would implement measures put forward in the government's fall economic statement. Many residents of my riding have been very hopeful for some time, Mr. Speaker, that we would see a new plan from this government to get our economy going again. However, time and time again, this government has disappointed, and I'm afraid that this economic statement was no exception to that. We know the pandemic has touched the lives of all Canadians one way or another. Far too many have lost a loved one. Others have been separated from friends and family, and small businesses across the country are struggling to get by if they have not yet closed their doors already. And Mr. Speaker, that is why Conservatives were in favor of new programs to support Canadians through this unprecedented time. Every step of the way, we worked with the government to bring forward very thoughtful amendments to improve many of these unprecedented programs, but much needed programs such as the recovery benefit and the wage subsidy, as many Canadians found that they were falling through the cracks of these programs. But we also know that moving forward, we need a long-term economic recovery plan that will result in jobs and paychecks for Canadians, not just more debt and more uncertainty. Mr. Speaker, we need a return to normal life and not another year or another year plus of more restrictions. As mentioned, this pandemic has devastated small businesses across the country. Many relief programs were not sufficient for many business owners, many seasonal operators in the riding of Kenora in particular, and they weren't able to keep their doors open. And I also believe a flawed rollout of these programs and in many cases poor communication on the part of the government has made this difficult time much worse for small business owners. So Conservatives spent much of the spring and pretty much all of the summer calling for improvements to these programs to help reduce some of the barriers to entry and help more Canadians get the support that they need in this desperate time. But unfortunately, we saw the Liberals drag their feet, and what should have been very simple fixes in many cases came far too late, or in some cases still have not come yet at all. But of course, none of this has stopped Liberals from wanting to move to raise taxes on Canadians. Unfortunately, that doesn't surprise me. It shouldn't surprise any members of the House or any Canadians who may be watching, because it is always ordinary, hardworking Canadians who are struggling to get by that have to pay the price for this government's mismanagement. In fact, Speaker, a friend of mine in the riding of Kenora has just recently had to close his business, as did his wife to close hers, and are unsure of their next move, given all the uncertainty moving forward. Also, according to CFIB, 1 in 6 small business owners are in a similar situation, actually considering closing their doors permanently. And I believe, Mr. Speaker, that this paints a very frustrating picture of the current situation and of the urgent need for a robust recovery plan. Of course, last spring, lockdowns and other restrictions were put in place by governments, not just across Canada, but across the world, and really in an effort to buy us time, to buy the government time to get access to what are more permanent solutions, like vaccines, of course, and rapid testing. We know now, Mr. Speaker, other countries are well on their way to vaccinating most of their populations and are making use of rapid testing as well. But this government has positioned us at the back of the line for vaccines, and of course, without widespread rapid testing. These are vitally important tools that are enabling other jurisdictions to position their economies to reopen, but many Canadians will be having to wait half a year or more before they can even get a first dose of a vaccine. And Mr. Speaker, this is incredibly troublesome for my region because tourism is a massive contributor to the economy in my riding, whether it's campgrounds, hotels, outfitters, regional airlines, restaurants, you name it. Any local shop has thrived in the past thanks to visitors from outside of the riding, and primarily from visitors from the United States. And to put in perspective, Mr. Speaker, for yourself and for all members of the House, the American clientele in my riding for tourism outfitters is so important, but just based on the sheer population, there are more people living in the state of Minnesota than in all of Northern Ontario and Manitoba, and I believe Saskatchewan combined. You might have to fact check me on that, Mr. Speaker, but we know that the market for domestic tourism is incredibly small when compared to what the American market brings in. So, of course, when the border closed last year, this business dried up, and what made things even more difficult for many in my riding was the uncertainty around what conditions the border may be able to open, or in some capacity open. The business owners didn't know if they should be recruiting staff or paying insurance or setting up their facilities for visitors who, of course, in the end weren't able to come last season. So not only did these business owners lose a whole season with no income, but they also spent thousands of dollars on overhead costs that turned out to be unnecessary because I think of a lack of clear communication and a clear plan forward from this government. And I'm afraid that history may be repeating itself as we get closer to the spring and have yet to see a plan forward from this government, Mr. Speaker. In the House yesterday, the honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill asked whether people who have been vaccinated against COVID-19 may be exempt from the Liberal government's new quarantine laws. And I believe it's safe to say that the answer from this government was non-committal. And it truly begs the question, if Canadians aren't able to travel freely after they've been fully vaccinated, when will they be able to do so? What criteria is the government using to decide when and whether these restrictions will be lifted, or is our entire plan just to continue with the status quo for forever, for as long as it takes? So I do believe my colleague from Nose Hill said it more eloquently yesterday, but there is a better way of doing things. There is a way that we could begin to return to normal while still protecting the health of Canadians and, of course, keeping those who are most vulnerable safe. Mr. Speaker, I believe strategic use of rapid testing could allow Canadians to go about their business more normally, but of course the government has not deployed them in a way that would allow that. And of course, vaccines, as I've noted, are vitally important, but we know the government has botched that procurement process. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe as of January, roughly 2% of Canadians, only 2% had received a single dose of a vaccine, Mr. Speaker. And that's why we need the government to bring forward a plan. We need the government to have success on bringing vaccines to Canada, because we know until the majority of the population is vaccinated, we'll be faced with more restrictions, more lockdowns, more workers losing their jobs, entrepreneurs losing their businesses, more Canadians struggling with isolation and with their mental health, and unfortunately more Canadians sick and more deaths. Mr. Speaker, I believe my time is shortly coming to a close. So I will say that Canada's Conservatives know that Canadians are frustrated and are looking for hope from their government and a clear path forward. That is what we are fighting for. We're fighting for every Canadian to have access to a vaccine. We're fighting for rapid testing and other measures to alleviate the impact of this pandemic. We're fighting for adequate support for our hospitals and healthcare systems, and we're fighting to ensure that entrepreneurs who make our country stronger will have a fighting chance. We can and we will beat this virus, and once we do, we will have even more work to be done to revive our economy and secure our future. Mr. Speaker, I will end it there, and I appreciate any questions and comments from my colleagues.